Thank you. I'll introduce myself. I understood that I was going to be introduced when I came over, but I guess maybe most of you know who I am anyway. You don't? I flattered myself. My name is Wesley J. Liebeler, Jim Liebeler. I'm on the faculty of the law school here. I was one of the 14 assistant counsels to the Warren Commission that conducted the investigation into the assassination of President Kennedy and that drafted the Warren Report. When I learned yesterday that Mr. Lane was going to appear here at UCLA, I requested the students responsible for this program to contact Mr. Lane and ask him to meet me on the platform in the other room just an hour ago. Mr. Lane, in all fairness to Mr. Lane was asked here to come and make a speech, and he stood on that position and declined to share the platform with me. So I came here to speak to you after Mr. Lane's speech. Mr. Lane issued a press conference this morning in which he challenges Commissioners Ford and Dulles to a public debate on the issues involved in the Warren Report and the investigation that the Warren Commission conducted. I was surprised, in view of the issuance of that press conference, that Mr. Lane wasn't willing to meet me in a public debate in the other room, but perhaps we can have that now. I want to comment briefly. Pardon? I was told when I came over here that I was going to be given the privilege of making a statement about Mr. Lane's performance, and the question that I'm answering, or that I'm trying to raise, is my view of Mr. Lane's performance as a former member of the staff of the Warren Commission.
During this period, while other students have questions, could you phrase that comment as the form of a question so that we can get to it?
I'm sorry, Mr. Levine. When I came over here, I was told that I'd be given the opportunity to make a statement to present my views, and I propose to do so. Now, when the students want to ask questions, I was also told when the students ask questions, they can address them either to Mr. Lane or to me, and if they want to hear my response to anything that Mr. Lane says during the course of this discussion, that I was to have a microphone and was able to give my response, and that's the condition under which I'm here. Mr. Lane in his press release today talks about the responsibility of citizenship, and he indicates that that's the reason why he's engaged in this endeavor in which he's engaged. I suggest to Mr. Lane that the first responsibility of citizenship in this country is to tell the truth. I stood here in this room a few minutes ago and heard him accuse the Warren Commission of deliberately telling one falsehood after another, of in effect, if not directly, attacking the integrity of the commissioners and the lawyers who worked in that commission. I just say again that Mr. Lane's first obligation as a citizen is to tell the truth, and I think it's about time we start. Now, he indicates in the press release that the basic documents in this case have been hidden in the National Archives until September 2039. I assume that Mr. Lane has been to the archives, and I assume that he knows that that statement is not true. The fact of the matter is that the underlying investigative reports, the reports of the investigation that was conducted by the FBI and the Secret Service and the CIA and other investigative branches of the government have been reviewed by those agencies, and they have applied a series of guidelines which are available at the archives or which have been given to the archives to indicate the standards that were brought to bear on which of these documents would be released and which would not. My understanding is that the ones that haven't... Pardon? Wait. When? The only documents that have not been made available to scholars and to interested citizens in the archives, as I understand at this point, are two basic types. One is a type that reflects personal information about some of the witnesses that is not relevant to any aspect of the investigation. Now, I can give... There's no use in trying to characterize it. I can give you some examples. The FBI developed information, for example, as to regards to the sexual habits of some of the people who were personally involved in this. Now, if those should be made available at this time, that's you're entitled to that opinion. But the opinion of the Commission and the agencies involved were that if these matters didn't relate to anything that was involved in the investigation, that it was more appropriate not to make these matters public record. There were other documents. For example, the identity of confidential informants has not been released. But every document that the Commission relied on that reflects an investigation of any aspect that was relevant to any conclusions of the report is available in the archives.
Well,
Up to this time, there is one...
If I can comment now,
I'm not,
be a question.
But I'm not through. I'm not through.
Mr. Liebeler, I'll comment on that aspect of it, and you or anyone else can ask any other question you want, but I'm not going to sit here and listen to this without being given an opportunity to respond. I was invited here to speak. I'm going to accept the courtesy which has been offered to me by the student body, and I'm going to speak. On the question of debate. Now let's go into that. On the question of debate. For almost 3 years, I've traveled up and down this country. I was here before at UCLA. I've been at 85 other college campuses. Where were the commission lawyers?
We're here now, Mr. Lane.
Just hold on.
We're here now.
I'm right here. Mr. Liebeler,
You've declined my invitation to
debate. Let's play a game called courtesy. You be quiet when I speak, and I'll be quiet when you speak. I have appeared on television with Mr. Liebeler. I have sought out and appeared on television with Mr. Jenner, one of the counterparts of senior counsel. Mr. Liebeler is one of the junior counsel. I've been on with Mr. Jenner and Mr. Ball, another commission lawyer, and Mr. Griffin, and I'm ready and willing and able to debate anyone, Mr. Liebeler, anybody else who has any knowledge or purports to have any knowledge about this case. But I do think that if a student body invites me to speak, I have the right to speak at an invitation. It doesn't mean that wherever I'm invited to speak, it must be transformed into a debate. I would suggest that Mr. Liebeler call the hotel that I'm staying at, arrange, if there's a student organization here, a debate on campus someday when it does not coincide with my other commitments, and I will be happy to meet him, I assure you.
Don't you want to discuss it now, Mr. Lane? You've issued a public statement challenging the debate.
If you will kindly just sit down for a moment, I'm going to respond to each of the points you've made thus far. You've made a number.
You interrupted me. I was speaking, and you interrupted me.
You've asked your question. I can't believe that you conduct your law classes here that way. I should hope not. Now regarding the reports that are in the National Archives. Number one, when last I was at the National Archives, and I must confess I don't go there every week to check up, but when last I was there, which was 3.5 months ago, there were 1,555 documents known as the basic source materials relied upon by the Warren Commission. Now, if in those 1,555 there are many documents dealing with the sex habits of individuals who are peripheral, I don't know why they're called basic source materials relied upon by the Warren Commission. I'm not sure what it is they were investigating, but I thought it was the assassination of the president. Of those 1,555, when I was last at the archives, 570 documents were classified and were not available to anyone, except, I suppose, maybe Mr. Liebeler can see them, or agents of the CIA, or those others in government who are associated with the Warren Commission. But an ordinary soul who's written a book or is a lawyer who's investigating the case is not permitted to see them, number one. Number two, in the archives are the minutes of the meetings of the commission members. Very interesting material, possibly. It might show what the commission members were thinking and saying, etc. Not one of those documents is available, all classified and all unavailable. If there were minutes taken, I don't know if there were, but if there were minutes taken of staff meetings as well, and I don't know if they were present because one can't tell from looking at the material in the archives, that's not available either. I talked with one of the assistant chief archivists, deputy archivists, and he indicated to me there were such minutes, he believes, but he knows that material is classified and cannot be seen. Now that material which can be seen, in some cases, is merely a photostatic copy and a poor copy in some cases where you can't even read all of the material. And that's a very small minority of the material, but that is a problem which exists with some of the material which has been available. Now Jacqueline Kennedy testified, as you may know. And what person besides Jacqueline Kennedy, what lay person, had a better opportunity to view the wounds that President Kennedy had suffered than Jacqueline Kennedy? After he was shot, she pulled him over. His head remained on her lap for the whole ride to the Parkland Hospital, and she was present as well for part of the time in the emergency room where the president was treated. She showed no reluctance to testify, and she voluntarily made a statement about the wounds which her husband had suffered. That material is in the National Archives, but you can't see that because if you read the report, her testimony, it says, bracket, reference to wounds deleted, close bracket. Now, what she said about the wounds, we don't know. The fact is this. Not one word of the testimony, of the transcript, of the testimony given by any of the witnesses is available to be seen. You cannot see the transcript. What you can see is a printed version published by the Commission. But if you look at Volume 1 of the evidence, there are 15 volumes of testimony. If you look in Volume 1, it states that the Commission reserved the right to edit the transcript, make those minor changes. In editing the transcript, it said, in order to improve, now get this phrase, in order to improve the clarity and the accuracy of the witness's testimony. So we have an improved version available to us. What the old, ordinary, unproved version might be in the transcripts, we don't know. Whether there are basic changes or not, we don't know. But I do know this, that one important witness to one of the aspects of the case revolving around Jack Ruby is a lady named Nancy Perrin Rich. Mrs. Rich testified that she worked for Jack Ruby. She was a bartender for him, that he knew over half the Dallas Police Force, that he was involved in illegal, corrupt activities with the Dallas Police Force over a period of time in Dallas, that he made liquor available to them, girls available to him, and he was involved in gambling. He was the bagman for the underworld, and paid off the Dallas police, and many, many witnesses said exactly the same thing. She was not the only one. She also told about a very important meeting she said took place. It was a group of people who were involved in sending guns to Cuba after Castro was premier, evidently an anti-Castro activity because they were going to smuggle volunteers out. And she told this story to the Commission, and it seemed a rather incredible story, except there is many of the elements of her story are corroborated independently by others. She said Jack Ruby walked into that meeting, and he appeared to have a big bulge in his pocket. There was a shortage of money. He went into the room with an American Lieutenant Army Colonel in the back room, and then he came out, and he didn't have the bulge anymore, and all of a sudden, all of the money, $25,000, appeared to have been available. And various aspects of this, as I say, are corroborated by what the witnesses said. She said she was then, and that's the way it's published. Now, of course, in the testimony, there's no reference at all to the fact that she saw any guns or any such thing. But when I questioned her, because that's the way the Commission published it, when I questioned her, and I have this on film and on tape, she told me that, and then she said, and I also told them that this Lieutenant Colonel and others took me down into the warehouse near that apartment building, and there I saw a pile of arms which amazed me, hand grenades, rifles, machine guns, etc. And she said, when I said that, the attorney for the Commission said, that's off the record, he said to the stenographer. And when she examined the printed transcript of what it is she said, none of that material was present there at all. Now, there are many statements running throughout the testimony off the record. For example, Marina Oswald testified when shown a photograph, Commission Exhibit 5 it's called, a photograph of General Walker's house, which the Commission and Marina said was taken by Lee Harvey Oswald. The Commission, of course, said that Oswald took a shot at General Walker as well, and this was part of the proof. But in the photograph, there's an automobile, very clearly visible, and there's a hole right in the middle of the back of the automobile where the license plate would ordinarily be. Marina Oswald said, when this picture was first shown to me by agents of the FBI, there was no hole there. There was a license plate. It had black and white numbers and letters. And then when the Commission showed it to me, there was a license plate with black and white letters and numbers. And what I'd like to know, she said, is why didn't somebody find out who tore a hole in this photograph after the Commission had it? Counsel said, off the record. And we don't know what transpired, but we know when they did come back on the record, there was no discussion of that matter again. Perhaps the matter was clarified to the concern of the Commission lawyer who was there. But this is, I believe it was Mr. Jenner, wasn't it? Mr. Liebeler? Oh, fine. Then maybe you'll tell us about how it happened that she stopped discussing. Yeah, tell us right now. I'd like to hear that.
This whole discussion, and we're going to focus on the license plate, is a discussion of why some material appears, why off-the-record conversations appear, or why the notation off the record appears in the printed version. Marina Oswald did ask why, as I recall it, why somebody wasn't trying to find out how this hole got in the picture. And that's exactly what I was trying to do. The first thing I was trying to establish is whether or not that hole or that black spot appeared in that picture when the commission first showed that document to Marina. I had no way of knowing whether it had or not because I wasn't present at the time and there was no reference to it or mention of it in the testimony that Marina first gave to the commission. So obviously the first thing that had to be done was to find out whether or not the hole was poked in the picture at the time Marina was first shown the picture. Now Marina testified, and that's all that Marina could testify about this presumably, particularly in view of the fact that she testified that the hole wasn't there. So obviously she couldn't tell us anything about how it got there because it wasn't there when she turned it over to the FBI. It apparently got there sometime later, or it was a different picture, or in fact it was a photograph. The thing that I had before her at that time was a photograph of the picture that apparently she'd been shown, because the hole wasn't actually in the photograph. There was just a black mark there which showed that the picture had been gouged out at some point along the line so that the license plate was obliterated. Now, isn't that right, Mr. Lane?
Oh, that's right.
That's right. Now, what I was trying to find out was how it got there, how the hole got in the photograph, why or how the license plate was obliterated. And this was the preliminary basis of trying to do it, to find out from Marina whether it was there at the time she testified before the commission. She said it wasn't, and we went on from there trying to find out how the hole got there. I'm very sorry to have to say that I was not able to find out how the hole did get there. I don't recall what the off-the-record conversation was at the time, but it had nothing to do with any... I don't recall why it was off the record, because I'll tell you that it was not off the... All right. I'll tell you it was not off the record. Out of any... There are all kinds of reasons why lawyers go off the record. Her lawyer interrupted and wanted to make some remarks and talked about it, and I don't recall whether it was I who asked it to go off the record or Marina or him or any of the kind. But I can tell you this, that the reason that we went off the record, I don't remember what it was, it had nothing whatever to do with any... Just a minute. It had nothing whatever to do with any attempt to suppress any evidence of anything. Now, at this point, at this point, there are two ways in which that. Well, at this point, there's no way in which that question could be answered, because even if you opened the original transcript in the archives, it wouldn't show what the conversation off the record was.
Can I just read the testimony here so that so there's no dispute about this.
Now look, Mr. Lane went on at length speaking about this. Now I'm going to say this. I came over here with the understanding that I would have the opportunity to respond to him, and I want to respond. Now if Mr. Lane doesn't want to debate these issues, I'm going to withdraw from this conversation. I didn't come over here to listen to Mr. Lane. I've heard him before, and I want to make my statement about it, or I'm going to leave. And if you don't let me make my statement, all I can do is accuse you of bad faith in getting me over here and coming over here. You had told me that I'd have access to the microphone, and I've got it. Yes, go ahead.
I would like to explain that regardless of the headline, the article of the Daily Bruin, as I wrote down the conversations, as I remember the conversations that I had with Professor Liebeler, Mr. Liebeler expressed interest in coming here when he heard that Mr. Lane was going to be here, and I told him that I would be most pleased to let him ask first because of his background in this, and has asked his questions, and I would like. I don't think this is Mark, do you have any comment on this?
If I don't get a chance to speak, and if we don't get a moderator here who's a moderator, I'm going to withdraw. I issue my challenge to Mr. Lane to debate. If he wants to debate, let him debate. It's not a reason. I'm not coming here to confirm what he's dead. That's how it goes back.
I wish.
Being moderator. He's sitting right over there.
Mr. Liebeler.
Let's debate right now.
May I?
Bill? Ms. Liebeler? You want to make a report?
Yeah, but I'd like to arrange for another debate.
All right, so let's.
I wonder if it's possible to say anything here.
You've been doing pretty well.
Yes. This is, remember that courtesy game we were going to play?
Yeah, let's.
Okay. This is, I must tell you this. I was invited here to speak. Now, Despite the activities of some, I'll always remember UCLA as a very courteous place. I was invited here by the student body to speak. I assumed that the invitation was offered in good faith. I have now indicated, when I just discovered today that Mr. Liebeler would like to debate, that I should be very pleased to debate with Mr. Liebeler. I will be here in Los Angeles until Tuesday. I'm sure that we can arrange a debate. I have a radio program to do in 20 minutes. I would rather not give up that radio program in order to answer the challenge now issued on this floor by Mr. Liebeler. So I have other responsibilities as well. If Mr. Liebeler and Mr. Levine and others can arrange a date, I shall be happy to engage.
This will be set.
When? Let's do it.
I shall be happy to arrange.
All right.
Excuse me.
And Gerbening will be the moderator.
Well, Mr. Liebeler, you're not really running the whole operation, are you? I mean, I know these are just students here and you're a professor. And I know that, but it's like having a witness before you. But let's allow the student body to work out any regulation it wants or any it wants. I'll be happy to debate. I beg your pardon? Yes, I'd like to. I don't want to make any more comment. I want to read to you exactly what the transcript is so we can refresh Mr. Liebeler's recollection of the examination which he conducted. I make reference now to volume 26, page 451 of the volumes of evidence. And this is the exact testimony with Mr. Liebeler conducting the examination. Question: who showed you the picture? The FBI or the Secret Service or the Commission? Question by Mr. Liebeler. Marina Oswald: the FBI first and then the Commission. Question: now at the time the Commission showed you the picture in Washington, was there a hole shown in the picture where the car's license plate would be? Marina Oswald: no. I don't know what happened to this picture, because when the Commission showed me the picture, there was not this spot there. If there was a hole, I would have asked them right away why that hole is there, or the black spot. Question: off the record, please. And that's the end of any reference to the photograph. I think it's unfortunate that it is off the record, and Mr. Liebeler doesn't recall precisely what happened. If it had been on the record, and the transcript revealed what took place, then we would not have to rely upon Mr. Liebeler's memory or anyone else's memory to find out how the investigation was conducted. It would be right there, and we would know how it was conducted. That's the problem, I think, with off-the-record statements.
Now, do you want to sure. All right. Yes, right there.
Yeah. I'll repeat the question if you don't hear it, if I hear it. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Secondly, I haven't heard anybody denying the trajectory of the bullets that hit Kennedy and Congress, whether one hit the bullets or whether one didn't go through. All of them agree that the trajectory was behind.
Who what? Who agrees with that?
Even you.
Oh. I don't recall agreeing to that.
Then I'll ask you.
Yes.
Is there any indication that any of the trajectories were from front or from the side?
Yes, there is a great deal. I discussed that at some length inside. Regarding the puff of smoke from the powder, which you say doesn't smoke, anything made after World War I doesn't smoke. I'm not an expert on rifles. I did, however, read the 26 volumes. The Commission asked the FBI to test this German Mannlicher Italian Carcano rifle from Mauser. And the FBI sent a letter to the Commission, signed by J. Edgar Hoover. And the letter said that when this rifle is fired, even in broad daylight, puffs of white smoke are visible from it. They spelled visible V-I-S-A-B-L-E, but we got the point anyway.